The light from my laptop screen cast a sterile blue glow across the darkened kitchen. It was 2:17 a.m. The only sounds were the low, electric hum of the refrigerator and the frantic, silent scrolling of my trackpad under my thumb. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. That's what frightened me the most. There was just a profound, unnatural stillness inside me, the kind of quiet that falls over a city after the storm has passed and flattened everything. I was staring at a spreadsheet. Not just any spreadsheet, but the spreadsheet. Our life, codified. The master budget I had built from scratch the year we got married. The one that tracked every dollar, every shared dream, every negotiated future. And on the line item for joint savings account, May expenditures, there was a hole. It wasn't a visible hole. To anyone else, to Kelvin, it would have looked perfect. Every withdrawal was accounted for, the mortgage payment, the BGE bill, the weekly grocery run to Wegmans. It was balanced to the penny, just as I designed it to be. But I am a procurement analyst. My entire professional life is about finding the ghost in the machine. I don't just look at what's there. I look for the negative space, for the purchase order that was requested but never filed, the invoice that was paid but never received. I look for the shape of what's missing. And there was a shape missing. A $785 shape. A delicate, silver and sapphire shape that I knew intimately because I had sent him the link to it myself. It was gone from the jeweler's website, but the corresponding withdrawal was not here in the account we shared, the account from which all our agreed-upon luxuries were meant to be drawn. The money for her necklace hadn't come from us. It had come from him. And in that silent, digital discrepancy, the entire architecture of our marriage revealed itself to be a fiction. The system had failed. Or rather, the system had worked perfectly, and I was simply the line item that had been deemed non-essential. My name is Asha. I am 34 years old. My husband, Kelvin, was 37. We had been together for 10 years, married for 7. That's long enough to build a life, or so I thought. In my job, I build supply chains. I source vendors, negotiate contracts, and create systems that ensure a product gets from raw material to finished good with maximum efficiency and minimal waste. You learn that a system is only as strong as its most unreliable vendor. You learn that trust is not a feeling. It's a verifiable metric, proven over time through consistent, predictable performance. For years, I had treated our marriage as the most important system of all, the one to which I allocated my best resources. I was the lead analyst, the project manager, and the chief investor. I did not realize I was also the only one reading the reports. I did not realize the person I'd contracted as my partner was quietly building a competing supply chain with my resources. The wound, when it came, wasn't a shout. It was a whisper. It was my 34th birthday, a Tuesday in early May, and the Baltimore air was thick with the promise of summer, all honeysuckle and humidity. I'd cooked his favorite dinner, Cajun shrimp pasta, and we were sitting on the small balcony of our Federal Hill row house, watching the evening settle over the city. I'd been talking for weeks about a necklace I'd found online from a local designer. It wasn't extravagant. A simple silver chain with a cluster of small, deep blue sapphires, the color of the harbor at dusk. It was beautiful, but more than that, it felt like me. I had sent him the link, a gentle nudge. If you're looking for ideas, I'd texted, adding a winking emoji to soften the request, to make it seem like a suggestion, not a demand. I was always softening things, sanding down my own desires so they wouldn't be an inconvenience. That night on the balcony, after I'd opened his gift, A very nice, very practical blender. I brought it up. I tried to be casual. "Hey, did you ever look at that necklace I sent you?" He was scrolling on his phone, half listening. "The blue one? Yeah, I saw it." "I really loved it," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. He sighed, a little puff of irritation, and finally looked up from his screen. He gave me a look that was meant to be sympathetic, but landed as condescending. It was a look I knew well, the one that preceded a gentle, logical denial of something I wanted. "Babe, it's beautiful. It is. But we can't afford that for you right now." He said "for you" as if it were a specialized, frivolous expense category, separate from the main budget. He tapped his phone screen, gesturing vaguely. "With the down payment savings, every dollar has a job right now. You know that. You made the plan." And there it was. The casual cruelty of it, wrapped in the language of our shared goals. He was using the very system I had built to protect us as a weapon to dismiss me. He was right. I had made the plan. I knew every cell of that spreadsheet. I knew where the flex was, where the discretionary funds sat. I knew that $785, while not nothing, would not derail our dream of buying a house in Mount Washington. It would be a rounding error in the grand scheme I had so carefully architected. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the assessment. He, the man I loved, had looked at my desire, weighed it against our financial plan, and deemed it an unacceptable variance, an overage, a line item to be rejected. I just nodded. I didn't argue. I picked up his plate and mine, carried them into the kitchen, and scraped the leftover shrimp into the trash. The blender sat on the counter, gleaming and sensible. A useful tool for a useful woman. I felt a familiar, dull ache settle behind my ribs. It was the feeling of being reasonable, the feeling of being understanding. It was the cost of being the one who always adjusted, who always made it make sense. He said, "We can't afford it." But what I heard was, "You are not worth the variance." And I, the good project manager, the efficient partner, accepted the note and filed it away. I adjusted, like I always did. The archaeology of our disrespect began with that spreadsheet. I created it a month after our wedding. Kelvin had a decent job in marketing, but he was financially chaotic. Bills were paid when the spirit moved him, late fees were just a cost of doing business, and savings was a vague concept he planned to get around to someday. I, on the other hand, saw our financial life as a system in need of optimization. So I built one. It was a masterpiece of domestic procurement. I linked our accounts, created automated transfers, and set up tracking categories for every conceivable expense. Household consumables, transportation, entertainment, joint, entertainment, individual. I made projections. I built formulas that calculated our net worth in real time. I created a 5-year plan with the primary objective being a 20% down payment on a house. It was my love language, expressed in VLOOKUPs and pivot tables. I was building the infrastructure for our future. At first, he was amazed. "Asha, this is incredible. You're a genius." He'd watch over my shoulder as I reconciled the accounts each Sunday night, a ritual that became as fixed as church for other couples. He loved the results. The steadily growing savings account, the absence of stressful calls from credit card companies. He loved the feeling of financial security I was manufacturing for us. But he never, not once, learned how to drive the machine himself. He was a passenger in his own life, and I was the chauffeur. Over the years, his awe curdled into expectation. My Sunday night reconciliations were no longer a shared project. They were a chore I performed while he watched a game or played on his PlayStation. "How are the numbers looking?" He'd call from the living room, as if I were a quarterly report he'd commissioned. The invisible labor was immense. I was the one who researched and switched our car insurance, saving us $400 a year. I was the one who noticed a billing error from the cable company and spent 2 hours on the phone getting it corrected. I was the one who managed our investment portfolio, a modest collection of index funds I'd set up after months of research. I handled the taxes. I paid the estimated quarterlies. I rolled over his old 401k from a job he'd left 3 years prior, a task he'd been putting off for so long it was in danger of being lost. Each of these acts was a deposit into the bank of us. I did them without complaint because I believed we were a team, and this was my position on the field. I was the strategist, the planner. He was the face of the brand. He was the one who would tell our friends, with a proud, proprietary air, "Asha handles all of our money. She's amazing." He wasn't lying. I was amazing. But the word he should have used was not handles. It was carries. I was carrying us. His financial contributions were consistent, I'll give him that. His paycheck was direct deposited into the joint account like clockwork. But his understanding of where the money went was abstract. To him, our joint account was a magical reservoir that was always full enough for his needs. My salary was a few $1,000s higher than his, but that wasn't the imbalance. The imbalance was cognitive. I carried the mental load of every single dollar. He just spent them. There were small tells, little erosions of respect that I chose to interpret as carelessness. He'd buy a new video game for $70 and categorize it as household goods. He'd take his friends out for a round of expensive cocktails and forget to log the expense, leaving me to hunt it down days later, a small mystery to be solved. When I'd bring it up gently, he'd get defensive. "God, Asha, it's $60. Does it really matter in the grand scheme of things?" "It matters to the plan," I'd say. "The plan only works if the data is clean." "It's not a business, it's our life," he'd retort, a line that was designed to make me feel cold and calculating. For a long time, it worked. I'd feel a flush of shame, a worry that my love for systems was eclipsing my love for him. I would soften, apologize for being so rigid, and manually recategorize the expense myself. I was the system administrator, constantly cleaning up his user errors. The worst part was how my own competence became a cage. When we decided to take a big trip to Spain 2 years ago, I planned the entire thing. I found the flights using a complex matrix of deal tracking sites. I booked Airbnbs in Madrid and Barcelona, cross-referencing reviews and locations for weeks. I created a detailed itinerary and a corresponding budget, down to the projected cost of tapas and museum tickets. Kelvin's only job was to enjoy it. And he did. He loved it. He posted photos of us in front of the Sagrada Familia with the caption, "Best trip with my best girl. She thinks of everything." Our friends commented with heart emojis and praise for what a wonderful couple we were. They saw a happy man and his thoughtful wife. They didn't see the hours of labor that had gone into manufacturing that happiness. They didn't see me, awake at 2 a.m. in our Barcelona apartment, rejiggering the budget because Kelvin had insisted on buying a ridiculously expensive leather jacket he didn't need. I remember that moment clearly. He was sleeping, a soft snore whistling from his parted lips. The jacket was draped over a chair, smelling richly of dye and money. I was at the small kitchen table, my laptop open, moving funds from our souvenirs column to cover the overage in his personal spending column. I had to pull it from somewhere, so I took it from mine. The small ceramic bowl I had planned to buy from a potter in the Gothic Quarter would have to wait for another trip. I made the adjustment. I balanced the sheet. I made it work. I remember looking at his sleeping face and feeling a wave of something that I thought was love, but I now recognize as a profound and wearying sense of responsibility. I was his buffer against reality. This pattern repeated itself endlessly. My needs were provisional, his were fixed. My desires were negotiable, his were facts on the ground. When my 10-year-old laptop finally died, I spent a month researching a replacement, comparing specs and prices, waiting for the model I wanted to go on sale. When his gaming console broke, he went to Best Buy the next day and bought the newest, most expensive model available. When I pointed out that it wasn't in the budget, he said, "We'll make it work. You'll figure it out." He said it with such confidence, such faith. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. You'll figure it out. And I did. I always did. I would adjust the spreadsheet. I would move a car payment into the next month's budget. I would reduce our grocery allowance. I would cancel my own small planned indulgences, a new book, a haircut, a class at the local yoga studio. I was the system's shock absorber. My role was to absorb the impacts of his whims so that the vehicle could continue moving smoothly forward. The conversation about the necklace on my birthday wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of 1,000 tiny concessions, 1,000 moments where I had agreed, silently or explicitly, that my value in the relationship was to facilitate his comfort. He told me, "We can't afford that for you right now," and my heart didn't break. It just logged the data. It was another entry in a long ledger of evidence, a ledger I had been meticulously keeping without ever admitting, even to myself, what it was adding up to. He didn't have a malicious mother-in-law or a bad influence best friend whispering in his ear, telling him he could do better. He didn't need one. His own comfort was the only third voice required. The entitlement was coming from inside the house. He had looked at the system we were in and concluded, based on years of my own behavior, that he was the customer and I was the service provider. And he was not wrong. That was the role I had played. The only thing left to do was to stop. The breaking point wasn't a crash. It was a quiet click. It happened 3 weeks after my birthday. The sting of his dismissal about the necklace had faded into the familiar background hum of my accommodation. I had moved on, or so I told myself. I was busy with a major project at work, a complex sourcing deal for a new manufacturing line. It involved tracing the flow of materials through dozens of vendors, auditing invoices against purchase orders, and ensuring every piece of the puzzle was accounted for. I was good at it. It was logical, clean, and honest. The numbers didn't lie. It was that mindset I brought home with me that Friday night. Kelvin was out with his friends. The house was quiet. I poured myself a glass of wine, put on some music, and sat down to do my weekly financial reconciliation. It was usually a 15-minute task, a quick import of transactions and a categorization check. But that night, I was in my professional headspace. I was in audit mode. I started with the joint checking account. Everything looked normal. Then I moved to the joint savings, the one we were using to build our down payment. I downloaded the month statement. Mortgage, check. Car insurance, check. Transfer from checking, check. I scrolled down the list, my eyes scanning the debits. And then I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. I went back to the jeweler's website. I searched for the necklace. A small red banner now appeared over the image. Sold out. My heart did a funny little stutter. It was possible someone else had bought it. Of course it was. It was a beautiful piece. But a professional instinct, the one that tells me to pull on a thread when something feels off, kicked in. I opened a new tab and logged into our joint credit card account. We barely used it, keeping it only for emergencies. The balance was 0. I logged into my personal credit card. Nothing. I didn't have access to his personal accounts. He'd always been vague about them, saying they were just for his fun money, a small allowance he took from his paycheck before the rest was deposited into our shared pool. I had never pushed it. It seemed like a fair compromise, a small zone of autonomy in our highly structured financial life. It was a vendor I had never audited. That's when I went back to the master budget spreadsheet. I looked at the line for Kelvin's personal allowance. It was a fixed amount, $300 a month, automatically transferred. I looked at my own personal allowance. It was the same, equal, fair, on paper. But then I thought about all the times I'd used my allowance to buy things for the house, a new set of dish towels, a welcome mat, fancy olive oil. I thought about the times I'd used it to buy his mother a birthday gift or to chip in for a present for his coworker's baby shower. My fun money was routinely funneled back into the maintenance of our shared life. I had no idea what he spent his on. It was a black box in the system. And then, the quiet click. He hadn't bought the necklace for me. I knew that with a certainty that was cold and absolute. He had looked at my birthday wish, my one specific, articulated desire, and he had looked at his own resources, and he had performed a cost-benefit analysis. He had told me we could not afford it. The plural was a shield. But he, individually, had funds. He had a secret budget. And on that budget, my happiness was not a priority line item. The question was no longer whether he had bought the necklace. The question was, who had he bought it for? My mind, the analytical engine I used to solve complex problems at work, started running simulations. The new woman in his marketing department he'd mentioned a few too many times? The old friend from college who had recently moved back to town? The possibilities scrolled through my head, but they were abstract, faceless. The identity of the other woman was irrelevant. She was just another unaudited vendor. The core of the problem was the procurement decision itself. Kelvin had a finite amount of discretionary resources, and he had chosen to allocate them to a competing interest. He had divested from our shared enterprise. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my wine glass. I just sat there in the blue light of the laptop, the music still playing softly in the background. I felt the color drain from my face, a physical sensation of blood retreating from my skin. It was the same feeling I got at work just before uncovering a major case of fraud. Not anger, but a cold, sharp, and devastating clarity. The discrepancy wasn't a mistake. It was a feature of a system I had misunderstood. I had spent years optimizing a process for a stated goal, our shared future. But the other key stakeholder had a different, undisclosed objective. He wasn't a partner. He was a liability. He wasn't just a passenger. He was a saboteur, quietly siphoning fuel from the engine while I was busy polishing the chrome. I closed the spreadsheet. I shut the laptop. I walked through the house we had shared for 7 years, the house I had filled with carefully chosen furniture, with organized cupboards and healthy food. I looked at the photos on the mantelpiece, us smiling in Spain, at our wedding, at a family cookout. I felt nothing. It was like looking at the marketing materials for a company I knew was bankrupt. The images were beautiful, but the underlying value was gone. He came home a few hours later, smelling of beer and stale bar air. He was cheerful, oblivious. He dropped his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, a bowl I had bought. He came into the kitchen and wrapped his arms around my waist from behind as I stood at the sink, rinsing my wine glass. "Hey, you," he murmured into my hair. "You're up late." I didn't lean back into him. I stood perfectly still. Couldn't sleep. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice still light, unconcerned. I placed the glass carefully in the dishwasher and closed the door. I turned in his arms to face him. I looked into his eyes, searching for some sign of the lie. There was nothing. Just a placid, comfortable love. The love of a man who feels secure. "Everything is fine," I said. And in that moment, I knew I was already gone. The decision had been made in a place deeper than thought. All that was left was the logistics of departure, and logistics were my specialty. The next morning, I woke up before him. This was not unusual. I was always the first one up. I made coffee, sat at my laptop, and began the quiet preparation. It felt, in a strange way, just like launching a new project at work. There was a clear objective: separation. There were key performance indicators: speed, efficiency, and silence. There was a budget, my own. Phase 1 was financial disentanglement. I logged into my company's HR portal. It took me less than 90 seconds to redirect my bi-weekly paycheck. Instead of flowing into our joint account, it would now be deposited into a new personal account I had opened online while the coffee was brewing. I set the effective date for the very next payroll cycle. That was in 4 days. Phase 2 was asset allocation. I went back to the master spreadsheet. It was a painful, intimate process. I duplicated the file, renaming it Asha Final. I went through it, line by line, and deleted every column, every cell, every formula that pertained to Kelvin. His income vanished. His portion of the bills, his personal spending, his retirement contributions. Delete, delete, delete. I watched as our projected net worth, the beautiful upward curving graph we had so often admired together, was sliced in half. Then I went further. I deleted my contributions to his debts, my management of his investments. The picture that remained was stark, but it was true. It was me. Alone. I felt a pang of something, not sadness, but a kind of professional grief for the failed project. 10 years of investment, of meticulous planning, of careful management, all culminating in this. A write-off. I had chosen a bad vendor. I had ignored the warning signs. My due diligence had been compromised by feeling. It was a rookie mistake. Phase 3 was securing a new facility. I opened Zillow. I knew Baltimore like the back of my hand. I knew the quiet streets in Hampton, the artsy lofts in Station North, the charming, compact apartments in Bolton Hill. I wasn't looking for a palace. I was looking for a sanctuary, a place that required only one key holder. I filtered by available now, 1 bedroom, in-unit laundry. My professional training kicked in. I compared square footage against price, analyzed photos for light and layout, cross-referenced the locations on a map for proximity to my office and a good grocery store. By noon, I had a short list of 3 apartments. I made appointments to see them the following Monday, using my lunch break. I told Kelvin I had a dentist appointment. The lie came easily. I was surprised by how little I felt. I was simply executing a plan. The emotional fallout could be processed later, once the mission was complete. For the next week, I lived a double life. On the surface, I was Asha, Kelvin's wife. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I watched TV with him on the couch, letting him rest his head in my lap. I was a brilliant performer. I smiled. I listened. I nodded. But inside, I was a procurement analyst running a critical, time-sensitive exit strategy. While he talked about a frustrating client, I was mentally running a checklist: cancel joint credit card, forward mail, pack personal documents. When he kissed me goodnight, I was thinking about the security deposit for the apartment in Hampton I had just been approved for. The apartment was perfect. It was on the second floor of a converted mill building, with high ceilings, huge windows that overlooked a quiet, leafy courtyard, and floors made of old, polished wood. It was smaller than our house, but it felt more spacious. It was a blank slate. It was mine. I signed the lease electronically from my desk at work. The first month's rent and security deposit were transferred from my new, secret account. The move-in date was 2 weeks away. The tension of this period was exquisite. It was the quiet hum of a machine working perfectly toward a conclusion that only I could see. Kelvin, oblivious, became almost more affectionate. He seemed to sense a shift in me, but he misinterpreted it. He thought my quietness was contentment. He thought my stillness was peace. One evening, he came up behind me while I was cooking and said, "You've been so chill lately. It's nice." I just stirred the sauce in the pan. "Just been a lot on my mind with the new project at work," I said. Another easy lie. He took it as an invitation to be the caring husband. "Don't work too hard, babe. You do so much for us." He kissed the top of my head. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He had no idea what I was doing for us. I was dismantling us piece by piece with the same methodical care I had used to build us. He was praising the demolition crew, thinking they were decorators. The day before the move, I packed. He was on a one-night business trip to D.C. It was an almost comical stroke of luck. I didn't have to sneak. I didn't have to rush. I had hired movers, 2 men who were efficient and incurious. I directed them with the calm authority of a project manager on site. My bedroom furniture, my clothes, the good set of pots and pans I had bought, the espresso machine, the art from the walls that I had chosen. I was surgical. I took what was mine, what I had paid for, and what held my memories, not our memories. I left the blender. I left the big screen TV. I left the PlayStation. I left the leather sofa we had picked out together. As the movers cleared the rooms, the house began to feel cavernous, full of echoes. The absence of my things was a presence in itself. The last thing I did was go to my desk. I opened the file cabinet where we kept our important documents. I took my passport, my birth certificate, my social security card, and then I took the binder. The big 3-inch binder labeled Household Finances. It contained 10 years of my work. The budget printouts, the net worth statements, the savings plans, the tax returns I'd filed. I took one last thing. I went to the printer and printed a single page from the Asha final spreadsheet. It was the budget summary. It showed the mortgage payment, the utilities, the car note. And at the top, under income, it showed only his salary. At the bottom, where the beautiful green number indicating our monthly savings used to be, there was now a terrifying number in red, in parentheses. A massive deficit. It was a picture of what his life would look like without my contribution, without my management. I walked into the kitchen and placed the single sheet of paper on the granite island, right in the center, where he couldn't miss it. I put his set of house keys on top of it to hold it down. It wasn't a note. It wasn't an explanation. It was a final report, a profit and loss statement. My name, my salary, my labor. All of it had been deleted. All that remained was him and the numbers. As I said, the numbers don't lie. I walked out of the house and did not look back. I got into my car, the car I had paid for, and drove across town to the apartment I had secured. The air in the car felt clean. The quiet was not the heavy, oppressive quiet of a secret, but the light, expansive quiet of freedom. The temperature of my heart was cool, detached, and already elsewhere. I was not running away from him. I was simply catching up with a decision my soul had already made. The first text started around 8 p.m., just as I was unpacking my box of books in my new, empty living room. Kelvin was home from his trip. 8:03 p.m. Hey, you're not here? I put a stack of novels on the windowsill. The light from the courtyard lamps was soft. 8:05 p.m. Asha? Where are you? 8:09 p.m. Okay, this isn't funny. Why is half the stuff in the house gone? Your closet is empty. I looked at my phone, at the rapid-fire messages appearing on the screen. I felt a clinical detachment, as if I were observing a system under a stress test. 8:15 p.m. What the hell is going on? Call me. My phone rang. His face, smiling from a picture we'd taken at the inner harbor, lit up the screen. I silenced it and set the phone face down. It immediately rang again and again. The vibrations buzzed against the wooden floor like a trapped insect. I let it buzz. Silence was my opening statement. It was the only response that couldn't be debated, reframed, or dismissed as an overreaction. The texts became more frantic, a cascade of confusion and then dawning anger. 8:25 p.m. Did you see the paper on the counter? What is this? Some kind of joke? 8:30 p.m. This is insane, Asha. You can't just leave without a word. This is childish, manipulative. There were the words, the familiar arsenal, dramatic, immature, manipulative. The words he used any time my emotions became inconvenient to him. It was comforting, in a way. He was so predictable. A system running its default program. 8:45 p.m. I'm coming to your mom's house. My phone rang again. This time it was my mother. I answered. Hi, Mama. Asha, baby. Kelvin just called me, sounding like a crazy person. Said you left him. Are you okay? Her voice was calm, steady. My mother had never been Kelvin's biggest fan. She saw him as a man who enjoyed the shade of a tree he hadn't planted. I'm okay, Mama. I'm more than okay. I have my own place now. Good, she said, and the single word was filled with a decade of unspoken opinion. I told him I hadn't heard from you and that if I did, I would tell you he called. Do not answer his calls tonight. Let him sit in the quiet you left him. That was the plan, I said. Good plan, she said. Call me tomorrow. I hung up and blocked Kelvin's number. For a few hours, there was peace. I ordered a pizza, sat on the floor of my empty living room, and ate it out of the box. The silence was glorious. It was the sound of my own thoughts. The next morning, the assault began on a new front. Emails, social media messages. He couldn't reach me directly, so he started broadcasting. He sent a long, rambling email with the subject line, "We need to talk. This is a huge mistake." I read it while drinking coffee, sitting on my new floor. It was a master class in performative remorse and blame shifting. He was sorry if he had hurt me. He was confused about why I was being so dramatic. He loved me. He couldn't believe I would throw away 10 years over what? A bad mood? He didn't mention the necklace. He didn't mention the spreadsheet. He was trying to frame my departure as a temporary, emotional outburst. I replied with a single sentence. It was a new email, a clean thread. My subject line was, "Our finances." The body of the email was simple. This isn't drama, Kelvin. This is an audit. It was the first mic drop. It was a redefinition. He wanted to talk about feelings. I was forcing him to talk about facts. His response came back almost instantly. An audit? What are you talking about? Are you insane? Just talk to me. I didn't reply to that one. I had work to do. I spent the day building my new life. I went to Target and bought towels, a shower curtain, and a coffee maker. I bought a single beautiful orchid and placed it on the windowsill. Every choice was mine. The color, the price, the quality. There were no negotiations, no compromises. It was intoxicating. The escalation continued. He tried recruiting allies. My best friend Simone called me that afternoon. "Hey," she said. "So, I just got a very weird voicemail from Kelvin. He sounds unwell. I left him, see." There was a pause, and then Simone let out a long, slow exhale. "Thank God," she said. "I was wondering how long it would take. My couch is yours if you need it." "I got my own place already," I said, a thrill of pride in my voice. "Of course you did," she laughed. "You probably had a 5-tab spreadsheet for this whole operation. You know me so well." He had tried my mother and my best friend, the 2 pillars of my life. He had found them to be load-bearing walls, and they were not on his side. He was isolated. This moved him to the next stage. Negotiation. A new email arrived that evening. The tone was different. Subdued. Desperate. "Okay, Asha. I get it. You're mad about your birthday. I'm sorry. I was being cheap. Let me make it up to you. I'll buy you the necklace. I'll buy you 10 necklaces. Just please come home. The house it's too quiet. I miss you." Here was the offer, arriving only after the consequences had landed. This was the classic move of a man who doesn't value something until it is gone. He wasn't offering to change. He was offering to pay the fee to get the service turned back on. I thought about how to reply. I could have been cruel. I could have asked him who the other necklace was for, but that would be engaging on his terms. Instead, I asked a simple, clarifying question. "And what would you have offered if I hadn't left?" The question hung in the digital air between us, unanswerable. Because the answer was nothing. He would have offered nothing. He would have continued on, comfortable and oblivious, while I continued to adjust. That question seemed to break something in him. The final stage of his cascade began. The raw vulnerability. He called me from a blocked number late that night. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct told me this was the one I needed to hear. "Asha." His voice was thick, broken. He was crying. It was the first time I had heard him cry since his grandmother's funeral. I didn't say anything. "Asha, please," he sobbed. "Please don't do this. I don't understand. I thought we were good." "We were not good, Kelvin," I said, my voice even, quiet. "We were convenient. For you." There was a long pause, filled with his ragged breathing, and then he said it. The most honest thing he had ever said to me. The line that was more devastating than any lie. I thought you'd adjust," he whispered. "Like you always do. I didn't think you would leave. I thought you'd just adjust like you always do." There it was. The entire thesis of our marriage spoken aloud. My ability to adapt, to absorb, to compensate. He didn't see it as a gift. He saw it as a feature, an endlessly exploitable resource. He wasn't just admitting his neglect. He was admitting his reliance on my complicity. He had built his comfort on the foundation of my flexibility, and he was genuinely shocked to discover that the foundation had limits. I felt a wave of something that wasn't anger or even pity. It was a profound, aching sadness for the man he was, for the man I had wanted him to be. He didn't lose me. He misplaced me. He had set me down somewhere in the sprawling, unaudited mess of his life and simply assumed I would be there when he needed me again. "I know," I said, and my voice was surprisingly gentle. "That was the problem." I ended the call. I blocked that number too. And then, for the first time in this whole process, I sat on my floor, leaned my head against the cold, unpainted wall of my new apartment, and I cried. I cried for the 10 years I had spent being so competent, so reliable, so endlessly adjustable. I cried for the woman who had believed that being useful was the same as being loved. And then I stopped. The tears were a final reconciliation, balancing an old account. I wiped my face, stood up, and started unpacking the next box. The weeks that followed were a study in quiet reclamation. My new apartment, the one I had sourced and secured myself, began to feel like home. The process of furnishing it became a joyful act of self-definition. I spent a whole Saturday in a furniture consignment shop in Hampton and bought a small, perfectly worn velvet armchair, the color of moss. I didn't have to ask for a second opinion. I didn't have to check a joint account. I saw it. I loved it. I bought it. I bought a real bed, a beautiful wooden frame with a headboard, and a mattress that was just for me. I bought sheets with a ridiculously high thread count. I bought art from a local festival in Druid Hill Park, a vibrant, abstract painting full of blues and golds that made me happy every time I looked at it. Kelvin had always hated abstract art. He called it messy. My life became my own. The rhythm of my days was dictated by my own needs, my own desires. If I wanted to eat cereal for dinner, I did. If I wanted to spend all of Sunday reading a book in my new armchair, I did. The constant, low-grade hum of managing another adult's life was gone, and the silence it left behind was peaceful. It was the sound of a balanced system. I initiated the divorce proceedings through a lawyer. It was a straightforward process. We had no children. The house was in both our names, but I had the binder with 10 years of financial data that clearly showed I had been the primary financial architect and contributor to our assets. My lawyer was delighted. She called it an open and shut case of economic imbalance. Kelvin, through his own lawyer, tried to fight it. He tried to argue for half of everything. I had my lawyer send his lawyer a single document, the final spreadsheet I had left on the island, the one showing the gaping hole my absence left in his financial life. His protests quieted after that. He agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds according to a formula my lawyer and I devised, one that weighted my contributions fairly. He was, in the end, a practical man. He understood numbers when they were presented as a consequence. I saw him one last time, about 6 months after I'd left. It was at the closing for the sale of the house. We sat at opposite ends of a long, polished conference table in a lawyer's office downtown. He looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. The confidence he used to wear like a well-tailored suit was gone. He looked ordinary. Just a man. He tried to catch my eye a few times, a pleading, wounded look in his gaze. I kept my attention on the documents in front of me, signing where my lawyer indicated. I felt no anger. I felt no triumph. I felt nothing but a quiet, sad distance. He was a vendor I no longer worked with, a closed account. After the last paper was signed, we stood up. He walked over to me, hovering awkwardly. "Asha," he said, his voice low. "Kelvin," I replied, my tone civil, neutral. "You look good," he said. It was true, I did. I was sleeping better. I had lost the tense, worried set of my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I carried. "Thank you," I said. He hesitated, fumbling for words. I get it now. The necklace. It was it doesn't matter. It was a stupid, awful thing to do. I was a fool." "Yes," I said. It was a simple agreement, more devastating than any argument. I wasn't interested in the details of his affair. The who, the where, the when. It was all just noise. The signal was the choice he had made. "Can I just ask you something?" he said, his voice cracking a little. "Was it just the necklace? Was that it?" I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I gave him the final piece of data he would ever get from me. "You didn't lose me, Kelvin," I said, my voice even and calm. "You misplaced me. You treated me like a spare key you thought would always be on the hook by the door. The necklace wasn't the wound. It was just the moment I realized the hook was empty." I turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving him standing there with his partial understanding. I did not need his apology. I did not need his closure. My closure was the new set of keys in my pocket, the ones that opened a door that was only mine. In the end, you learn that love is not an emotion. It is a system. It is a series of 1,000 small procurement decisions made every single day. It is a choice to allocate your most precious, non-renewable resources, your time, your attention, your care, your respect, to a shared enterprise. It is a contract that is renegotiated with every sunrise, with every shared meal, with every quiet moment of choice. For years, I was the only one auditing the contract. I was the only one who noticed the slow, steady bleed of resources, the systemic imbalance that was leading us toward an inevitable bankruptcy of the heart. I thought my job was to keep adjusting, to keep compensating, to be the endless buffer between the man I loved and the consequences of his own choices. I thought that was love. I learned it was just unpaid labor. Leaving wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of fiscal responsibility. It was a final, painful, but necessary balancing of the books. You cannot build a future on a faulty foundation. You cannot sustain a system where one partner is the investor and the other is just a cost. It is not a sustainable model. It is not love. My life now is not loud or triumphant or cinematic. It is quiet. It is steady. It is a well-managed system with a single, reliable vendor, myself. The peace I have is not the peace of victory. It is the peace of a balanced ledger. It is the deep, cellular calm of knowing that every resource I have is invested in a future that values me. I am no longer an adjustment. I am the entire plan.